Some people wear two faces, one for the cameras and one for the servants who are too afraid to speak. In the great stone palace of Aldermere, everyone believed the Duchess Cordelia was gentle, warm, and perfect. The people loved her. The king adored her. But behind the tall painted doors where no camera reached, a very different woman lived. For years, nobody dared to say a word. Then one winter, an old and powerful queen from a neighboring land came to visit, a woman who noticed everything and feared no one. What she saw in 3 short days would shake the throne of Aldermere to its roots. This is the story of the day the truth walked into the palace, sat down at the royal table, and refused to stay quiet. Queen Ingrid of Veldoria arrived at Aldermere on a gray, frozen morning. She was 70 years old, small in body but sharp as winter glass, and she had ruled her own kingdom for 40 years without ever being fooled by a pretty smile. Her carriage rolled through the palace gates while trumpets played and servants bowed. King Edmund of Aldermere met her at the steps himself, kissing her hand with real warmth. He had known Ingrid since he was a boy. She had been a close friend of his late mother. To him, she was family. Beside the king stood his wife, the Duchess Cordelia. She was beautiful in the way that made rooms go quiet, tall, graceful, dressed in soft blue silk. She smiled at Ingrid and spoke sweet words of welcome. "You honor us, your majesty," she said gently. "Our home is your home." The watching crowd sighed with love. Cordelia always knew exactly what to say. But Ingrid did not smile back right away. Her old eyes, pale and steady, moved slowly across Cordelia's face. She had met 1,000 people in her long life, and she had learned to read the small things others missed, the tightness around the mouth, the coldness in the eyes even while the lips smiled. Something in Cordelia's welcome felt rehearsed, like a line from a play performed too many times. Still, Ingrid said nothing. She was a guest, and guests did not accuse their hosts on the front steps. She simply nodded, thanked them, and allowed herself to be led inside. As they walked through the grand hall, a young maid named Elsa hurried past carrying a heavy tray. The girl's hands were shaking. When Cordelia's gaze fell on her, Elsa flinched, a small, sharp movement like an animal expecting a blow. The king noticed nothing. He was already talking about dinner, but Queen Ingrid saw it. She saw all of it, and quietly inside her careful old heart she began to watch. That evening, at the long dinner table lit by 100 candles, the palace showed its perfect face. Music played softly. Gold plates gleamed. King Edmund laughed loudly at his own stories, happy to have his dear old friend beside him. Duchess Cordelia sat like a painting, poised and lovely, praising the food, praising the king, praising everything. To any ordinary guest, it was a beautiful night. But Ingrid was not an ordinary guest. While she smiled and made polite conversation, her eyes never truly rested. She watched how Cordelia treated the servants when the king looked away. She saw the Duchess snap her fingers without a word, saw her point at a dish and wave it back with a flick of disgust, saw the way she stared coldly at a young footman until his hands trembled and he nearly dropped the wine. The change was remarkable. When Edmund looked at his wife, Cordelia's face melted into softness. The moment his attention turned, that softness vanished like breath on a cold window. It was 2 different women sharing one body, and only Ingrid seemed to notice the switch. Later, when the meal ended, Ingrid asked to walk the halls before bed. A servant was sent to guide her, the same shaking girl, Elsa. As they walked the quiet corridors alone, Ingrid spoke gently. "You seem tired, child," she said. "Do they let you rest here?" Elsa's eyes filled at once with fear. "I mustn't speak of the household, your majesty," she whispered. "Please, it is not allowed." Those few words told Ingrid more than any speech could. Not allowed. In a happy home, servants did not tremble at a kind question. She patted the girl's arm softly and said no more, but her mind was working like a clock. Over the next 2 days, Ingrid played the harmless old woman. She dozed in chairs, asked for extra blankets, wandered the palace by accident. And everywhere she wandered, she gathered small truths. She heard a cook weeping in the kitchen after Cordelia had blamed her for a burnt loaf that was never burnt. She saw an old gardener dismissed in the rain for picking the wrong flowers. She noticed how every servant lowered their eyes and held their breath whenever the Duchess passed. Yet in front of the king, Cordelia remained a saint. She kissed his cheek. She stroked his hand. She spoke of how much she loved our dear people. Edmund believed every word because he was a good man, and good men often fail to imagine cruelty in the ones they love. Ingrid understood this, and she knew that simply telling him would not be enough. He would not believe words alone. He would need to see it with his own eyes. On the third day, Queen Ingrid made her quiet plan. She was leaving the following morning, and she would not leave without giving her old friend the truth, but she would give it in a way he could not deny. That afternoon, she invited King Edmund to take tea with her in the small east parlor, a cozy room with thick curtains and a door that did not quite close. It was, she knew, the room beside the servants' passage, where the household staff carried linens and trays all day long. She chose it on purpose. "Edmund," she said warmly, pouring his tea herself, "sit with me. Let an old woman enjoy your company one last time." He laughed and sat delighted. For a while they spoke of his mother, of old summers, of gentler days. Ingrid let him relax completely. Then softly she said, "Stay a moment longer, and whatever you hear, my dear boy, do not speak. Only listen." Edmund frowned, confused, but he trusted her. So he stayed. And the palace, not knowing the king sat behind that half-open door, carried on as it always did. Minutes passed. Then through the thin wall from the servants' passage came a voice they both knew well, but not as Edmund knew it. It was Cordelia, sharp and hissing, scolding poor Elsa over a wrinkled cloth. The words were ugly, cruel names, cold threats. She told the girl she was worthless, that she could be thrown into the street with a single word, that no one would ever believe a servant over a duchess. King Edmund went very still. The cup froze halfway to his lips. This was not the gentle voice that sang to him at dinner. This was a stranger, hard, hateful, and enjoying its own power. He rose slowly from his chair, his face pale as ash, and Ingrid gently caught his sleeve. "Not yet," she whispered. "Hear all of it, so there can be no doubt." So he listened, trembling with a father's kind of pain, as the woman he loved revealed, word by ugly word, the face she had hidden from him for years. When Cordelia's voice finally fell silent, King Edmund stepped out from behind the door. The corridor froze. Elsa gasped and dropped to her knees, certain she would be blamed. Cordelia spun around, and for one terrible second before she could rebuild her mask, Edmund saw the truth naked on her face. Not shame, but annoyance. She was not sorry. She was only sorry to be caught. Then the mask snapped back into place. "Edmund, my love," she breathed, rushing toward him with wet, sudden eyes. "The girl was rude, I was only correcting." "Enough." The king's voice was quiet, but it stopped her cold. He had never spoken to her that way. He looked down at the shaking maid, then at the pale faces of servants gathered in the passage, all of them watching, all of them waiting to see if the man they served would finally believe them. Slowly, gently, he helped Elsa to her feet with his own hand. "You are not worthless, child," he said. "You never were, and you are safe now." Behind him, Queen Ingrid stepped into the light, small and calm and unbreakable. She did not gloat. She only looked at Cordelia with the tired eyes of a woman who had seen this kind of cruelty many times. "A crown does not make a person kind," she said softly. "It only gives them more people to be cruel to." Today, Aldermere learned which kind of queen it truly had. Cordelia's tears turned to fury. She looked to Edmund for rescue, but he had already turned away from her, not in anger but in grief, the grief of a man realizing he had loved a face and never known the person behind it. In the days that followed, the palace changed. The frightened servants slowly lifted their heads. Elsa was given kinder work and a fair wage, and the Duchess, stripped of the king's blind trust, found that a mask once broken could never be worn the same way again. On the morning Queen Ingrid finally left, King Edmund walked her to her carriage, quiet and older-seeming than before. "You knew," he said, "from the first day." "I suspected," she answered gently. "The truth only needed a door left open." She squeezed his hand. "Be well, my boy, and remember, the ones who serve you in silence often see you most clearly. Never stop listening to them." Her carriage rolled away through the frost, and behind her, the palace of Aldermere stood a little quieter, a little kinder, and a great deal wiser than the day she came.